So we have stereotypes. So the first degree is unconscious bias. Unconscious bias, if unchecked, evolves to prejudice. Prejudice, if unchecked, evolves to stereotypes. Stereotypes, if unchecked, evolves to discrimination. And discrimination, if unchecked, evolves to racism. So if we cut it at the bud, like with unconscious bias, we can prevent it to go to prejudice or stereotypes or discrimination or racism. So stereotypes are based on images in mass media. So when we look at all the movies that depict that every single person that hijack a plane is a Middle Eastern and they are terrorists, that's why when we see a Middle Eastern person in a plane, in an airport, we kind of, for a second, like are taken back, because that picture gets reflected in front of our eyes. If we look at people of color as gang members and doing harm, when we see people on the street that look like whatever movies we have been watching or whatever we see on the news, we get taken back as well. Or if we have reputation that are passed from parents or peers or society, we get to think about stereotyping these people, either positive or negative. Like I talked about negative, the positive, for example, is when we say all Asian people are good in math, or all Asians drive a BMW. You know, it's a positive thing, but it's still a stereotype. So a stereotype is erroneous, meaning it's wrong, and it leads to unjustified conclusion. And again, it can be conscious or unconscious. It distorts the truth because it's an exaggerated belief. And basically, our reactions are based on our pre-programming. We're talking about first impressions, like when you meet someone right away, what judgment, because it's a judgment that we do. So I want you to know that whenever we see someone for the first time, we form a lasting impression or a lasting impact on us, that once it's formed, it's very hard to change, even if we are offered contrary information that made us think that how to feel about that person. Even if we know that the information that we had was wrong. Why? Because the reason first impressions are independent of the evidence that created them. And also, there is nothing called first impressions once we're past 17 years old. We have seen everything in our life. So the first impression are actually a gut reaction to a memory that we have. Like I said before, we saw something in a movie, or we read something in a newspaper, or the person in front of me, I want to really help them because they remind me of my grandfather that I adored. Or that person, I'm like, because she reminds me of my cousin that I hated with a passion. So we all react from a gut reaction towards the person in front of us, and it has nothing to do with the person in front of us. And that's why when we get that knee-jerk reaction, we need to breathe, to give the 30 seconds to our brain to go from the survival or the memory to the analytical thinking. So we don't apply that first impression and box that person in a box that we will never be able to change in our mind later on. Benefit of the doubt, more or less. So reality is the perception from our point of view. Prejudice is an attitude. We might not act on it, and it's unjustified. It can go, like I said, prejudice to stereotypes. So stereotype is a belief. It can go to discrimination, and discrimination is a behavior or action. Our perceptions are reinforced by what we have been taught. Like, for example, I use a pita bread, I cut it in the middle, open it as a sandwich, and stuff it with stuff. My husband uses the pita the pita bread as a tortilla, and he does tacos with it. So it's what we have been taught, right? And it has been 20 years, and we still use it in different ways. But on a serious note, this really happened. We were in our backyard one day, and our neighbor came, and my husband was with me, and she asked Joe to translate something to her landscaper in Spanish. So I turned around and I did the translation. And when I finished, I looked at her face, and it was like really funny. And she goes like, wait a second, you are the one doing the translation? Her perception, because my husband is Hispanic, he speaks Spanish, and he doesn't. And I'm Egyptian and I speak Spanish. But it was her perception that because he's Hispanic, he must be speaking Spanish, or he must speak Spanish. That's the perception.